Hey, happy Thursday, everybody. So I cannot believe this Atlanta weather. I know I said this yesterday, but it's crazy. I need a boat. The ark needs to be built. It's gloomy. It's summertime, and I'm not at the pool. I don't know about you guys, but I need to be at the pool. I need to be working on my tan. So welcome today, Thursday. So I had a great conversation with an old friend yesterday. Hello, hello. And we actually connected quite a few years ago at a different gym together. And then we kind of have followed each other through the years. We both have this like entrepreneurial, ugh, my cold spirit that we have in common. And so it was really fun yesterday to connect with her. And we got into this conversation. We got into this conversation of where we were. We haven't connected for probably about like 5 years, I would say. So we're kind of getting caught up real quick in between the kids coming and pulling us in different directions. But we were talking about, where we were when we first met 8 years ago to where we are now and just those in between. And of course, we landed on our work life. What does our work life look like? And it was so interesting. I said to her, well, how was work today? And she's like, ugh. And I was like, uh-oh, what happened? So we got in this really great conversation, and she was talking about a coworker who is just a drag. This individual is just constantly complaining, constantly like poking at each other. He's just one of those individuals. Does anybody have one of those in their work environment that it's just like, no matter what you do, they're just negative and they're really difficult to work with. They're difficult to be around. And so she and I were talking about this, that he's just like this guy that just sucks the air out of the room, and they're on the same team. And ultimately she's like, it was at the end of the day, like he kept going after me at the end of the day, and she was just kind of explaining, it's just so hard to deal with this. It's just so hard to deal with that. And so I was starting to think about that, and she and I had some more conversations, and it kind of kept kind of basing around, how do you deal with negative people in your life? Like how do you deal with them? If you can't walk away from them, whether it's a coworker, a manager, a spouse, a friend, if you really like legitimately can't walk away from them, how do you deal with them? I mean, how do you deal with negative people? Because I think a lot of times for a lot of us, we are seeking to grow and develop. That's why you guys are watching The Sneaker Life. That's why you tune in. That's why you read. That's why you listen to podcasts and those sort of things, because you're always trying to find ways to grow and to develop, right? To create a life worth walking in. And so we're always going to find someone, hi Kara, we're always going to find someone that's negative. And so how do we deal with them? I think the first thing that we have to recognize when we're dealing with people that are negative is it really does help to understand, where's that negativity coming from? Where's that negativity coming from? I think for us to truly deal with negative people, we need to understand where it's coming from. I always say there's half glass full and half glass empty people, right? We have all different types. But I think it's really helpful if we can just try to identify or try to understand the compassion that we need with the negative people in our life. Because if we can understand that, then we don't just like kind of like get stuck on it, right? And we like ruminate and just chew on it, like they just drive us crazy. To stop that thought process, let's start with a little bit of compassion. So I think the first thing to recognize when people are negative, is it's usually rooted in fear. It's rooted in fear. Negativity is typically rooted in fear. I've said this a lot. A lot of our weak behaviors or not so great behaviors, negative behaviors, are typically rooted in fear, and they can present in different ways. And so a negative individual, it can present in negativity, and it's rooted in fear. So a lot of times it can just be generalized fear, right? Just kind of generalized fear. We know those people that are just kind of afraid of just kind of everything. Or it really can, a lot of times, be rooted in the fear of acceptance, their worth, right? Their worth is low. I hope I don't start coughing. This cold of mine, I'm telling you. Or the other kind of fear that negativity can be rooted in is in mistrust. So I want you to think about an individual that you are just like, they're so negative. They suck the life out of you. Try to take a step back. And try to identify, where is this negativity rooted in this person? Because I really truly believe all of us have the capability of identifying where other people are coming from. It's a practice though. You have to practice compassion. You have to practice this kind of, okay, this is how I go about situations. Maybe this is how they go about situations. You know what I mean? Like, introspection is key. And I think compassion is key in you dealing with a negative person. So just understanding that negativity is routinely rooted in fear. So we know all these negative people, right? Like my friend that was talking yesterday about this person that she has to work with, he's just an ogre. And he's always like just kind of going after people and attacking people. And she said, and ultimately he's doing his thing and he makes an ass out of himself in front of everybody, you know? And she's like, it was just so frustrating. So we know people like that, right? We know people that their negativity comes across as an ogre, as they're gonna just pound everybody. They're putting everybody down. You know, they are very kind of controlling in that manner. So you have to understand, when a person is like what she was dealing with, he was trying to control the situation. And the more we talked about the situation, they're both jockeying for a level above them into management. They're both jockeying for the position. So he's dealing with his fear of not getting it by being negative in this controlling, just abrasive attitude, right? But we are understanding why. I'm like, oh, so you guys are jockeying for the same position. She's like, yes, but like, this is not how you get to that point. But again, that's how he's dealing with those fears. You guys get that? So you know, a lot of people too, when they're negative, somebody might give a compliment and ultimately, they'll be like, well, and nobody compliments them back. You can kind of see that like look go across their face of, well, what do you mean? I'm not good enough either. That's that constant turning it around on themselves, Well, why are they good enough and I'm not? I mean, it's just that constant conversation, and it's an exhausting conversation with somebody like that. It can be an exhausting conversation. Or negative people can be very judgmental. Now, this is something that I'll be honest about. I get stuck in judgment and rumination. Two factors in negativity. And I have to key into what my weaknesses are. And so when I get stuck into like a judgmental, ruminating thought process, usually I have to look at what's this rooted in. And when this has happened, it's rooted in, I'm seeing a path that this individual is not seeing, and I wish they would get on my path because I ultimately can see that it'll be better in my mind, right? That's very judgmental. Or I'm wanting people just to get on this path. Come on, like, why can't you see this? It's very judgmental. Or if somebody does something negative to me, like somebody, causes me a wrong, whatever it may be, I ruminate on it, right? And I sit there and I chew on it and I get frustrated. And so those are two that I have identified for myself that I get very stuck in. And I have to be introspective when I'm even dealing with those behaviors on my own. So this is important too. When you're dealing with a negative person, keep in mind, you're negative too. All of us are negative. It's just, how are you expressing that negativity? How are you expressing that negativity? So another kind of negative person that we all know is the helpless negative, right? The Eeyore. I mean, the person that is just like, no matter what you say, no matter what you do to show them what their strengths are, whatever it is just this constant helplessness. And they're very difficult to be around. And the hard part about that is this is a person that it's a fear of their belonging, a fear of their acceptance, but they don't recognize, but by their behavior of this helpless behavior, this Eeyore behavior, they're pushing the people away that they really ultimately want and need that belonging and acceptance from, right? I mean, negativity is just like this double-edged sword that all of us have to deal with. Then you'll have like the generally pessimistic people, or the people that are very risk aversive. So there's a lot of different negative people. So again, If you can't simply walk away from an individual, it's a coworker, it's a manager, it's a client, it's a spouse, it's a kid, a teacher, whatever it is, if you ultimately are stuck, right? You're stuck with this people, then what you can do is a couple different things. So a lot of old school thought, especially if you're like in a team environment, something like that, is to give feedback. The problem with feedback is all of us get ticked off when we get feedback. Let's just be honest, right? We say we like constructive criticism, but we get our back up, right? And that's a problem with feedback. Feedback is really focused on a past behavior. And so when you're giving feedback to someone, number one, they might not have even asked you for your feedback. You're not in a team environment and they're like, who the hell are you to give me feedback, right? So that's the problem with feedback, and that's kind of old school thought process. That's how a lot of companies are still doing their reviews, right? I'm giving you feedback on this past. However, what's really coming to the forefront is feed forward. So the difference between feedback and feed forward is feedback is based on the past behaviors, like my friend and this coworker, what he did to tick her off, right? How rude he was. Whereas you can do a feed forward process. And so that's really acknowledging the person. Hi guys, acknowledging the person who's in front of you. Acknowledging who that person is, because the first thing is, whenever you're dealing with anybody with negativity, anything like that, give them a little compassion, because we're negative too. We all go through that. Give them a little compassion. So start off with just acknowledging them. So in her situation, I hear you. She can do that. It's a completely disarming arming technique, or just say, okay, you can disarm the conversation so that there's no continuation. Now we know those people that are going to keep going after us, right? They're a dog with a bone. So during that feedback, or the feed forward, you acknowledge them, or you can just cut off the conversation. I hear you. Okay, I can understand from why you would feel this, from your perspective. You need to do that. So what I call this is sandwiching. Sandwiching. And so sandwiching is very helpful. You guys have probably heard this. You probably heard this with a lot of parenting techniques, is you start with a positive. You talk about, okay, we're going to kind of work about this behavior in the middle, not calling it bad, not focusing on past behaviors, but this is what I hear what you're saying with this. Maybe we should consider this. And I really love that you're coming to me with these ideas. Do you see? There's a sandwich effect. The middle is not exactly bad, but it is giving a feed forward. So that sounds like a great idea. What do you think about X, Y, Z? So it really is about maintaining that person in the steering seat, right? They're still steering the conversation. So if they're that controlling negative person, they can still feel like they have a control over the situation. I have used this a lot of different times, especially in coaching, because again, feedback is very hard for all of us to take, because it's focused on our past behavior and it's telling us, I'm not good enough. Whereas we're giving feed forward, we're allowing the individual to be recognized. I hear you, I see you, I understand what's going on. And then allowing to give them, this is great. Would you consider this? You're asking them a question. You're not saying, hey, stop being a jerk, dude. You're sandwiching the conversation. I'll never forget a time, it was so funny. And we had reviews at a company that I was working with, and they would email us the reviews. And I was like, whoa, oh my gosh, my surveys are like so good. And I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, they're sandwiching me. Holy crap, when's the bologna coming? And so I had contacted the admin. I'm like, I know you're sandwiching me. You need to stop sandwiching me right now. And she's like, what do you mean I'm sandwiching you? And I explained this process, that sandwiching or feeding forward really does disarm negative situations. It really is helpful. So try feeding forward. Try sandwiching a conversation. So acknowledge who they are as an individual. In the middle, ask a question where you want to steer the conversation without being judgmental. And then end the conversation with thanks for having this conversation with me. So sandwich people that are negative. Try that. Now, sometimes that doesn't work either, right? We all know people, and maybe they're just like, screw you, I know you're sandwiching me, whatever it is. So then the other option when you're dealing with negative people is that you can bring in a third party. You can bring in a third party. So whether that's a coach, that's a counselor, that's upper management, whatever it is, you could bring in a arbitrator and just kind of bring the parties together. Now, I don't know. I mean, you could do this in a marriage. So you go to a counselor, right? If you're having financial troubles, you could go to a financial planner, right? There's a lot of situations where you can do that. But what about if you're the manager and the person below you? Who do you bring in, right? Who do you bring in as a third party? It can be kind of a tricky situation. A lot of amazing corporations now have like a wellness coach that kind of comes in there and acts in these kind of situations. But if that's not another option, honestly, guys, the best way to deal with negative people in your life is starting off with compassion, being introspective with yourself, identifying why you're negative in your life and how it presents, because we all have it. I shared what mine is. So start with compassion, right? Then you just got to own yourself. You got to own responsibility for your own actions. And like I said this to my friend yesterday, I said, I know that's really hard. He ended up making an ass out of himself, but what can you do? She's like, it just sucks the life out of me. And I'm like, absolutely. Those people are absolutely exhausting. So you have to understand in these situations, y'all, we have a choice. We have a choice over the energy that we give or the energy that we take in from these negative individuals. And so our reaction to these negative people really define the reaction that's going to be taking place. So if this individual is sucking the life out of you, you can't physically get away from them, or they're, a family member, whatever it may be, then it's up to you. It's up to you to be introspective, to have compassion for the individual, try to understand what kind of fear it's rooted in, and ultimately be like, okay, I'm responsible for myself. I can't help that this person is negative. And if they don't want to come along and put on the rose-colored glasses, that's on them. I can't change this. So when you're in this situation with a negative person, don't get caught up in the negativity, right? I've been around those people. I'm like, what the heck, and then I'm ruminating and I'm mad, and that's just stealing my energy. So ultimately, when you're dealing with negative people, have compassion and recognize you are only in control of yourself. You can walk away from the situation. You can make a choice not to sit in it and to walk away from it, emotionally or mentally. We might be stuck. We're going to be stuck with negative people. This is just part of it. And it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard when we see people doing that and they suck the life out of us. But ultimately, it lies on our shoulders to react the way in which we want our environment to be. Does that make sense? Our reaction is going to affect our environment. And our environment is truly what we have control over, our person, right? So again, how to deal with negative people. There is no one set way of dealing with this, but I really do think a feed forward approach, if you have that option with someone, I think it's a great approach. Practice sandwiching with somebody. It really does make an enormous difference. And it's going to take practice so you don't sound like contrived, and it's going to take some practice. So really kind of focus on that, making sure that you're acknowledging them as a human being and asking questions to help them kind of dig further. If you have that option within your relationship with them, that's great. And if you don't, you can get a third party to help you out. And if that's not an option, then ultimately, sorry guys. Oh, it's going to be bad.